Hello and welcome back to the Politics of Peterborough podcast. I'm your host, Dave Adcock. This is part 2 of a pre-election roundtable with Councillor Julie Stevenson, Councillor Mark Ormston and Toby Wood. If you haven't listened to part 1 yet, it's not essential to have done so, but I would recommend pressing pause and going to listen to that first, then coming back to part 2. Just a note, on election night I'll be staying up and posting all the results as they come in on X and Facebook at PoliticsPBORO, so do make sure that you're following along, and why not join me to keep me entertained. Otherwise, on with the show. So perhaps we can now move on to start looking at the parties and the state they're in at the moment. So starting with Labour, they've held the leadership of the council since the last local elections, first under Councillor Dennis Jones and then lately under Councillor Kayum. Councillor Jones resigned for the leadership after Councillor Blakemore-Creedon released text conversations between them. Do you think that situation, it's 7 months ago now or so, is still going to be in the minds of voters, and what impact will that have on Labour's chances at this election?
Speaking as a councillor, Orton Waterville ward, which I always think of south of the river, no one's really aware of any of that stuff. They're not. I mean, partly I guess our residents have been kind of conditioned by over the past 8 years of the way that myself, Councillor Day, have operated, which is very much very high visibility, and getting problems solved is what we are all about, and fighting for residents on issues that affect them. I like to think we're good councillors, running a good role model to stuff that happens in another part of the city or even with the leadership. I actually think if you asked a lot of residents who's leading the council, they wouldn't know, because they're very focused locally. So that won't have much impact on certainly my ward.
It's very difficult for me to sort of comment on actual individuals. I mean, in the Civic Society, we've actually had really good, really good meetings particularly with the Peterborough First leadership and also the Labour leadership. And the key seems to have been for that leader, whoever it has been, to try and promote some sort of collaborative feel. I know that sounds a bit wishy-washy, a bit sort of pie in the sky, but I think it's a recognition that, particularly with Peterborough City Council, the makeup of the council, where there are so many wide varying views, a good leader from whichever party is going to be the one that actually manages to coalesce quite a few of those people and to communicate some sort of common vision.
One issue that has seemed to have had cut through, particularly online, was the decision by Cabinet to recommend the postponement of this year's elections. Do we think that will have a particular impact for those parties that were seen to vote for that?
It's had a dreadful impact on the smaller parties with less money, who have to plan out their campaign literature quite a while in advance. It'd be just shocking. I mean, it had quite an impact on me, but that's personal, and I will get over it, and I have got over it. To think I was thinking of retiring and then finding out I had another 2 years before that. But there we are. But for those smaller parties who are, it's harder for them to resource elections as it is. It was incredibly destructive, and for what? What was achieved by that? So I'm very sorry that will happen, but it was not the fault of anyone locally. It really wasn't. That was national government, and everyone here did their best, including the incumbents here running the administration. Everyone did their best in an unacceptable situation.
I think everyone knows where my position was on it. I spoke at the cabinet meeting. I spoke at the full council meeting. I even seconded the motion for the letter. As Julie said, look, this was national government that was opposing it. They asked the question in a particular way. It was very difficult to answer that question without going, well, yes, of course it would save resource and time. No one's going to say no, they're all twiddling their thumbs. So of course it will save resource and time. I personally would have loved to see us be positive and brave and say we can do both. As I said in my speeches, I think nationally it was handled absolutely horrifically. I felt awful for my colleagues who made a decision to say, no, tricky decision, we don't want the elections, and they're saying, you're having the elections. I think that was very, very unfair on them.
In my interview with Councillor Kayum before these elections, she said that retaining 3 of the 6 seats they were defending would be a good result. Is that a fair assessment, or should the group leader be more positive for her candidates?
No, I think that's, if I'm being very honest, I think that's realistic. That's exactly, I do this. I've mapped out where I think it's going to go. I'm going to see how accurate I am on the night. But I do see them losing three seats this time round, and I don't think that's a bad result for them. I think actually, when you look at the national picture and you zoom out, that will look like a decent result.
I think the realism is refreshing, and I also think it's astute, because what's really being said there is we know we're going to have to work in a coalition if we want to continue leadership and continue this stability. I think that's a very astute way to approach that, and one I like to hear.
And my view really is very apolitical, but quite sort of basic, is that whoever gets elected, I want to see them be first-class local councillors representing their constituents. And that's the best way to take things forward locally. If they're not very good at what they do, then we're taking a step backwards. Simple as that.
Moving on to the Conservatives, they've locally long outperformed the national party's polling and performance, and have topped the popular vote in the city at every local election for the last 25 years. That continued with Paul Bristow's election as the combined authority mayor last year, where he's swept the board across the city. Could we see them surprise us again this year?
I can resume. I can certainly say where I think it's heading again with my mapping. I see them actually potentially maintaining / losing, going down by one. After the elections in May. I wouldn't be at all surprised though if they take the majority vote share across the city. I think that could be the likely outcome for the Conservative Party, and I think they will know themselves, nationally, they need to rebuild, reflect and rebuild, and they'll, I'm sure, see LGR as an opportunity to do that.
I sense they may have a resourcing issue in terms of candidates, because when I was elected, I say 8 years ago, they have pretty consistently tried to get those seats back from us. So they haven't succeeded. In fact, all three. When I first stood, it was 3 Conservative incumbents, and one by one, it went down to 0. But they had been trying and putting good candidates forward. This year, nothing. And okay, they didn't know that I was going to retire. If they had, they might have viewed my ward differently and might have prioritised it, perhaps, if they'd known. But it's a 2-horse race, pretty much, in my ward, I think, between Reform and the Greens. So, but I don't, from the inside, from having put together enough elections and candidate slates in my time, it feels like the Conservatives may be lacking viable candidates who are difficult to get at this time, and it does make a huge difference.
Being a bit dispassionate about it, it'll be very interesting after the election to see what the relationship is between those that are returned as Conservative councillors and Reform councillors. It'll be very interesting to see what their relationship between each other is.
I mean, also, technically, the Conservatives have, I think it's 7 defences this time around. Obviously, I think 4 of them have defected during that 4-year period. I know Councillor Ormston, you, like me, do enjoy a good polling website, and on some of those there is the potential that the Conservatives could see a complete wipeout at these elections. If that happens, what is their position going to be going forward? How can they turn that around?
I mean, if that is the case, I mean, as I said earlier, I don't think that would be the case. But if that is the case, then I think they do. They look at LGR. Like I say, I have reservations about the timeline. I do have reservations about the timeline with LGR, but let's work on the premise there's going to be all outs next year. We know there's going to be all outs next year. That's what we're all working towards now. This next year, like I say, from a governance point of view, it's all about transition and making it as smooth as possible. Politically, at that layer underneath, they're gearing up for the biggest elections that they're going to have for the next 5 years. Because if you get in 27, you're in a shadow for a year, and then you're elected for 4 years after into that new authority. 5 years point. So it is massive. The next all-out elections, in theory, in 27, is going to be the hardest fought we've seen in a long time.
Moving on to Reform, obviously they come into this election as a bit of an unknown entity in the city. They did win the Fletton and Woodston by-election in February, but prior to that they hadn't had more than one or two candidates and a couple of hundred votes citywide at any local election. Councillor O'Neill stated that they were aiming to win or looking to win every seat across the city this year. Could we see them repeat what they managed in Kent last year, where they gained over 70% of the seats that were up?
I can't see that being the situation, because some of the candidates that are up this year, some of the sitting councillors are very good, are very popular and well supported. I think their vote share will go down considerably. If I, tooting my own horn, if I were still standing, I would expect to retain my seat, because someone coming in cold with no experience who no one knows. In my ward, we've encouraged residents to get to know their councillor and get to know us as people. So the idea that someone could come from nowhere would be dependent, I think, on a lot of people who don't voting and remembering to do so. And I just think for some of the councillors, the incumbents currently, they're too far ahead for that. But, I may eat those words. We will see. It was close in Fletton, wasn't it? So there will be some gains, but not as much as we might have seen in other areas. Also, we're in a slightly different position nationally. I feel the tide's turning a bit against Reform nationally. I mean, considering some of what's gone on in other councils, I don't think Peterborough's rushing to invite in some of that. I mean, people quitting very soon after winning the seats because it's not been what they've expected it to be. So it's going to be really interesting, that's for sure.
I think a number of the people that might be considered natural Reform voters aren't the sort of people that naturally vote in local elections. I think that's going to be quite a consideration as well.
I'll just give a slightly different opinion. I think they'll be the biggest winners of the night. I think they will have the most amount of gains. Naturally, that's because they're building, whereas everyone else is defending. So I think either way we look at it, Reform will win the most amount of seats on the night as a party.
In terms of where the votes are coming from, are they mainly coming from Conservative voters, or do we think they are encouraging some of those politically disenfranchised people that we were talking about before who haven't been voting? Could they actually be pulling that turnout out to get people out to vote because they feel there is a realistic option this time?
Yes. So there you go. Yes. I think the reality is if you are minded to protest vote, that might be where you're going. Likewise, the Greens. Maybe I'm being unfair there, but there is this sort of thinking that if you're left-leaning and you wish to protest vote, you might go Green. If you're right-leaning and you're minded to protest vote, you might well go Reform. Now, I know that's oversimplifying it, but I think there is a rough rule of thumb with that thinking. I also think that there's people that are naturally Conservative voters that are now going to vote for Reform, and we've discussed it all the way through, so it'd be wrong not to include it here. If they're a good local candidate, forget the party, vote for the individual. If you believe in that individual, you vote for that individual.
It's important to remember what happened in 2018 in Orton Waterville ward. That ward had been a solid 3 councillor Conservatives for years, and the shift was Conservative to Green. I think people often think that left-leaning thing. It isn't that. It's just not that, is what we found. I think we also need to look back. When I first stood in 2016, just as a paper candidate, as they say, so not with any realistic prospect of winning at that time, when UKIP were very strong. And that was an all-out, in fact, and the 3 Conservative incumbents kept their seats, which kind of says something about maintaining the status quo. And next was UKIP. And then me, I was only 42 votes behind, I think, too close for comfort for UKIP. They didn't stand again the following year because of that. So probably it's worth looking at that pattern about UKIP. I mean, they peak and then they fall away really sharply because of circumstances. It's about getting the vote out. But what I'm finding in my ward, they've done no door knocking. They've done, I think, one leaflet that didn't really say anything. And people don't know who they are. Those things really do count. So if that's repeated, and I think it is across other wards, I'm not so sure they're going to get as many seats as we might think, because Peterborough voters expect a bit more now. So as I say, it's going to be very interesting. It all, you know what, everything depends on turnout on the day. It's who remembers to vote. It makes a huge difference.
And just speaking a bit anecdotally as well, a lot of the people that I know who are nearly all people that would normally vote in local elections and certainly do, they are considering voting Green, and that is not... they're sort of lending the Green Party their vote, which might not be the same in a general election. And it's a protest against Labour nationally. And the thing that Keir Starmer said, there's going to be huge change, and the perception, rightly or wrongly, that there hasn't been a great deal of change. So I think the Green Party will do pretty well in Peterborough, but not necessarily in the longer term.
Councillor Ormston, you said you feel that they will be the winners in terms of the number of seats on the night. What do we think would be considered a good result for them, based on the fact they've come out and said that they're aiming to win every seat? What could they look back on and say, actually, that was a really good result?
It's difficult. You don't know the inner workings of the party. I'm sure the party message is that you do go out there and everything you communicate, you say you're going to win every seat. So I'm sure there's a case of that. I mean, my guesstimates are that we will end up with 5 or 6 reform councillors after the mayor elections, including the one that we currently have sitting. That's where I've landed with my guess.
I would like to be a fly on the wall at their headquarters, if indeed they have one. I'm not sure that they do in Peterborough. On if suddenly there is an influx of 5 or 6 or 7, whatever, how on earth they're going to organise themselves? Because with me, when I came in as the first Green, and then we had another Green, and then you grow, all coming in at once with no experience between them. Because I don't think any of them have been have any of the candidates been councillors? Yeah, of course. Oh, well, there you go. It's going to be down to Mr. Tyler if they get in, because you need to organise yourselves pretty quickly to start running the city. So I think that's a huge challenge, and I wonder if they're aware of that, because the impression I get is that they're not aware of how difficult all of this. Just learning how the council works, takes months and months. So I think they've got a huge procedural challenge ahead of them, and we wait to see how they manage that.
And I just clearly defer to Mark and Julie, because they obviously know what they're talking about.
As time will prove, we don't.
Yes, exactly. As Dave will tell you, I never do. I never do.
Now, we've already sort of touched on the Greens. In 2024, they had a mixed bag. Obviously, Councillor Knight had left and then won re-election as an independent, but they also did have wins in Orton, Longville and Ravensthorpe. This year, nationally, they've had a big step forward following the election of Zach Polanski as leader. Is this their big opportunity, do you think, to really stamp their mark on the council this year?
It's a huge opportunity for them to grow, and they're going to be acutely aware of that. Peterborough is very, very different. Each ward is very different. Orton, Longville and Orton Waterville, completely different. They're next to each other. But the Greens know that. The thing is, when you spend a lot of years in opposition on building, you're learning all of the time. And I know it's a huge difference with, for example, when I was elected, I got 3 times the vote of one of the Conservatives who's never had to fight the way I did to get those votes, just to get in. So the Greens, like the Liberal Democrats, the real fighters, and no stone is left unturned to try and succeed. So they'll be acutely aware of that, the Greens, and I know they're working incredibly hard to make the most of the situation that we're in now. Whether it's sustainable long term, who knows, because I never imagined the Conservative vote would be so diminished. If you'd asked me 5 years ago, I wouldn't have believed that we're in this situation. Things change really, really quickly in politics. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see if they're a younger party. The difficulty is, and I know that as having led the Greens on the council for the first 3 years we're on there, it's really hard to sustain success when you're also trying to grow. And that may be the downfall of anyone who finds themselves in that situation.
I think there's a real opportunity here for the Greens and Labour and the Lib Dems to be seen to be mutually beneficial. If the electorate in Peterborough see that people are working together and they're collaborating, I think that there's a real opportunity for them to be mutually beneficial. A lot of the Peterborough electorate remember the big mistakes that were made by the Conservatives. They remember things like the Hilton Hotel. That's another thing, remember, as well as we ain't got a John Lewis anymore, we often get about the Hilton Hotel, and that's not been mentioned for now. Now, I don't know the financial ins and outs, but that's a real black mark against the previous administration. So I think there's a real opportunity for Greens and Labour in particular to be seen to be having some sort of broad coalition locally.
I mean, I've got the Greens as gaining after May. I do think that the Greens will look at total voter share. I think that would be the big, because I haven't got them picking up many seats, but I've got them winning. I don't think but I think they'll tell a very nice narrative that they've picked up a much greater vote share, and that'll be pleasing for them. They'll want to move into that momentum into next year and the years ahead.
I mean, when I spoke to Councillor Ali before, when we sat down for the local election series, they were very much targeting doubling the number of councillors. They're looking they want at least 10 councillors after this. And when I asked them about vote share, I said, is this your opportunity to go above 20%? They're absolutely targeting that. Is that realistic, or do we think they're going to just fall short of that?
You never know. I think it's good to have a target. If I was still in there, I was all about targets. I'd set myself 5 targets and I achieved all of them. And so they'll do it. It's motivating to have a target. I don't think we should assume the worst there. Hard work does a lot, and they work hard. So they are also very, the Greens and the Liberal Democrats, I have to say, very collaborative. And I think one of the things that's nice at the moment is that I feel that under the current leadership, Shabina Kayum, she's taken a leaf out of their book, and she is collaborative with the Greens and Lib Dems in a way that has strengthened Labour and her position on the council, and that's what people want now, and they want for the city. And I think that may be why people are also turning more towards the Greens and less so towards the Conservatives. I think maybe people are done with that two-party Tory versus Conservative thing, and it's more about collaboration now, and that's resulting in good things being done in the city, which is what people want.
I agree with Julie there. A lot of the people that I speak to, many of them older people, have been really in favour of that collaborative approach, and are really appreciating the fact that Shabina Kayum has done that. I mean, obviously, I don't know the sort of ins and outs of it all, but the general feeling is that it's much more positive having that.
It goes back to your earlier point about the context of how you're positioning your leadership and how you're rallying your troops. You said that Councillor Kayum was saying that 3. We want to, if we only lose 3, that's a good result. For the Greens, it should be the exact opposite, right? You should be saying we've got national momentum. Now's our opportunity. Let's go and target and push and galvanise as much as possible. I would be saying the same thing if I was in the party. Realistically, I think that's a stretch target, but that's the sort of things I'll be saying in the meetings.
Kind of reticent to move on to the Lib Dems because they kind of feel a little bit like the forgotten men sometimes. Have they position themselves as a sort of competent alternative to those on the council, or are they just sort of viewed as a bit part player?
Nick Sanford losing his seat was a huge loss, huge loss to them. I mean, it was only by like 5 votes. And there's lessons in there. He's such a huge contributor to the council chamber, but you have to also spin that other plate, which is your local community as well, and doing those two things are really difficult. I have to say I'm hugely impressed by Councillor Hogg and his leadership and his collaboration and his guts as well. He takes a lot of criticism at full council, and some of it is deeply unpleasant and unwarranted in my opinion, but he always takes it in good humour, and that's good to see. And he's approachable. But there's not enough of them. There's not enough of him. And they're a small group. But it feels, they do feel a little bit lost. I agree with you. There's some very, very strong personalities at the council, and that loss of Councillor Sanford is very, very strongly felt.
It's interesting, actually. Councillor Hogg approached me a while ago and organised a Lib Dem walk around the city centre looking at the building and the buildings and heritage, because he wanted the people that he was working with to know a bit more about Peterborough, and I thought that was quite telling.
I've got them as potentially maintaining, potentially picking up one, potentially losing one. To be honest, I don't think it could be quite a bad night for them if they lose two. I think that'd be seen as a bad night for them. It's really on a bit of a knife edge for them, to be honest. But my expectation is them maintaining the status quo.
The thing is, whether or however you feel about the Green leadership nationally, you feel something. That's the thing. The public like personalities, and what we found is with voting that is, when it comes to a ballot paper, if you haven't thought about it too much and you see a name you recognise, that's where you put your X. And the Greens, although there's been some difficult press for Zach Polanski nationally, people know the Greens and know they're serious and know they've got a chance of winning, and psychologically that goes a long way with the voters. So that makes it interesting, and the Lib Dems, I'm afraid, just don't have that at the moment.
I mean, do we think if they manage to stick pretty much where they are, that we're likely to see them continue in the kind of role that they're in at the moment, supporting other parties to maintain that leadership position?
I think it's highly likely that we're looking at a coalition of some kind, aren't we? I think there's the optimist in me, like I was saying earlier about the fantasy football team, but I think the reality is actually one of the two big parties, if they are the biggest player, one will work with that party, one won't. And I think that's the sad reality of where we are with local politics.
And the number of warm bodies really does matter. If you've got too few people working extremely hard, we're only humans at the end of the day, burnout. And that's what happens in politics all the time. People have a few strong years and then you just can't keep going that long, so that they need to grow, and they will know that. And they will have lots of people who are not councillors but in the background supporting, because all of the parties do. But that's a real consideration for them, but it's a consideration for all the parties all the time, to keep new people coming through, so that you don't burn out to the point where the party basically collapses locally.
So moving on to the final official group on the council, Peterborough First. They were riding high in 2024 after seeing their numbers swollen by a significant number of defections. They were running the council after the successful vote of no confidence against Councillor Fitzgerald. And then they had 4 wins out of 4 candidates that they had put up in those local elections. Since then, however, we've seen Councillor Howard defect back to the Conservatives, Councillor Anchinas, Councillor Elsie and yourself, Councillor Ormston, leaving the group to sit as independents. Do you want to talk us through the circumstances of your departure, first of all?
Yeah, very happy to. I think, there's 2 main reasons. The first main reason was I had to reset my priorities. My priorities were off. I was spending too much time within the group and sorting out group dynamics, and wanted to be a helpful contributor within the group and within the city council. And being the sort of individual I am, as much as I enjoyed that, I was being pulled too much into that. I'm elected by my residents, and I knew I've got my full-time day job as well. I knew that I couldn't keep doing it. As Julie was saying, people burn out over many years. I was burning out over 18 months. I just couldn't keep doing it. And I'm not going to over-exaggerate it. I was probably doing 3 to 4 hours of conversations and meetings just about the group and people within the group every day, 7 days a week for a period of time. And I just couldn't keep going, and it wouldn't be fair on residents if I did keep going, or the city council as a whole, because I made the decision, potentially somewhat rashly and somewhat unfairly, a day before the full council, where there was the no confidence motion that went in, and I'm not disclosing anything that's not in the public. I was going to have Councillor Jamil's role. So, second largest portfolio behind leader in the council. And I had a really long reflection going, could you do that role justice? And the answer was no. So I had to turn around and say, I want you to put someone else in that position if you're going to do it. And I need to step away, because otherwise, being the personality I am, I would just always be drawn into it, because that's who I am. So that was the main reason behind it, is I needed to do something to reset my priorities. The other reason was I was just a little bit different fundamentally with my principles and how I saw things against how the group saw things at that time. And it got to the point where I thought, either I'm not communicating well enough to be able to see them, enable people to see things the way that I'm seeing things, or I'm now beginning to become a hindrance. And I don't want to be a hindrance. So again, I thought in coalition with the other points, it was best to remove myself from the situation.
Obviously, as I say, you were one of 4 new candidates that stood in 2024, and all 4 of you won. Did Peterborough First, was that the boat? Have they missed that boat at that point? Did they not? Could they have put more candidates forward that they would have also won, or was it just purely because of their selectiveness in terms of the candidates they chose that they were successful?
Well, I think they've done a very good one, and I thought they knew. No, I honestly just felt that it's very similar as it is today. I think it's very hard to get candidates. I don't think there's an awful lot of people queuing outside any political party door saying, I'm ready to be a candidate and I'm going to be strong in this area. I think there's a lack of candidates at the moment. I think that Peterborough First, and this is my honest opinion, they're all wonderful people. I love all of them individually, and they all add an awful lot to their roles. But I think they struggled a little bit from growing pains. You know, as Julie was saying earlier about reform and the potential that they might. I think Peterborough First went through growing pains. They had a large influx that wasn't existing councillors. There were new councillors who all had slightly different views, and that's the beauty of being independent. So you can have those differing views, but there still has to be a framework, guiding principles of how you're going to deal with those differing views and a direction of travel. And during my time there, that framework wasn't quite as solid as potentially it could be. And once again, much like the others, we don't need to dwell on the past. We don't need to worry about what Mark Ormston thought and what he feels his experience is. They've got a fantastic opportunity moving forward if they so wish to take it.
Do we think that kind of group, which is said to be as a group of independents who are all kind of free to vote however they want as long as they follow certain principles, is that something that can actually work? I mean, obviously they did lead the council for a while, but as a long-term kind of strategy, is that something that can actually work?
Well, it hasn't worked, has it? I mean, the reason I didn't join them, obviously, and there I am at one point I was the only independent on the council, and I've been joined, and then people have moved around. They are mostly conservatives. You see, they are. That's just the reality of it, and that's not my politics. And although, they say we're independents, yeah, but you're clearly not, because I've heard buzz so much from various members about not agreeing with people and the way things are done. And I thought you were all just under a label, but you were actually independent. So it's very hard to make those sorts of things work without actually becoming a political party, because you have to have some consensus and you have to have some leadership. And I've seen struggles when I was within the Greens of this idea of leadership. I have a particular idea about leadership because I've come through the charity sector, which is very like local government. So I want structure. I want it rigid. I want everyone knowing what they're doing and where the reporting lines are. And I want people to be praised when they do well and supported when they need assistance. And if you don't have all of that, chaos, pretty quickly. As Marcus said, you try and grow too quickly and it just all kind of falls apart. So I think there were missed opportunities. I think at the previous election, they should have focused on more seats. And that would help. The more people you got, the more it helps those who are, kind of at the head of it. So, I think that's over.
I think a group of individuals is a bit of an oxymoron. I think that's the tension, really, isn't it?
Obviously, this time around, they've got 2 candidates, both in wards where they currently have a sitting councillor. Do we see them going forward looking to stand new candidates, or is it always going to be potentially just a bringing in sort of those that leave elsewhere, or is this kind of the beginning of the end for that sort of idea as a group?
I guess it depends who their leader is and how their leader is minded to do it. His leadership style, and whether they want to look at it as in the ways we've kind of all been discussing. You know, you need to grow the group in a certain way, or if not, it's so hard to say. They've had so many losses. I'm surprised they're able to they want to keep going under that banner. I think also that it's just very confusing to the public. Confused mind says no. You know, if the public are confused about what they stand for, which I think they also were when they were in power, to be honest, there's so many pieces missing from their story, whole communications, defining who we are, defining what we stand for. And they can do all of that without fundamentally changing who they are. But if they want people to get behind them, and the voting public to get behind them, they need to tighten those things up.
Yeah, I think, as Julie's alluded to, for me, it's only going to go one of two ways. The bleak picture is actually people are going to start dropping off, and it'll come to a natural conclusion. It'll end, or they could look to build. And like I said, we've got perfect. I'm going to keep saying it. There's lots of potential for that to happen moving forward. But for me and my experience, it may already be different, but for me and my experiences, they probably need to do a little bit of work internally, because you can be independent and you can have your voice, and they've used that. And I've had the experience of that. I've disagreed with the group disagreed with me, and we've had those open conversations, and we were all friendly, and there was no problems with that whatsoever. So it can work. But when it gets a little bit more tricky, and there's those bigger decisions, there needs to be some sort of internal understanding, at least, of how they're going to be resolved. And that's all I'll say. But perfect opportunity moving forward, just like everyone else. It doesn't need to just be doom and gloom. There's a bright future there if they decide to take it.
It's worth mentioning that there are also a number of independents, actually labelled as independents, standing at these elections. On the council at the moment, we have a lot of independents, but there's only one that was actually originally elected as an independent, which is Councillor Ty. How much of an impact do we think those independents, I mean, obviously an independent was elected in your ward last time, Councillor Stevenson, obviously on the back of having been a Green. Her husband is standing at these elections as an independent. Do we think that they could have an impact, whether it is being elected or actually have an impact on the result?
I have concerns about independents who don't have any council experience or political experience, because I say, and I know this makes me unpopular with them when I say this, there's a difference between being a councillor and being a community volunteer. Community volunteer is really important. The trouble is, when we have elections coming up, lots of incumbent councillors are all out with a litter picker, and then they won't touch one, the rest of the time. But it's the work of the councillors, as Mark said earlier in this, it's governance, and you need to be able to do that stuff, and it's really hard. It's really hard standing up in the council chamber and making speeches and influencing policy, and that's what a councillor is. It's a strange job, because in order to become a councillor, you have to do all this litter stick waving and leaflets, and that's not what you do when you're actually elected. The part you receive your allowance for, that you're paid for, is turning up at those council meetings and on committees, and doing that work. And that's not. I'm not disparaging people who put themselves forward. I think that's brilliant, but they need to, I hope, understand the role they're putting themselves forward for, which is an awful lot more. I mean, I wish, it was all picking up litter and being out in the sunshine and chatting with people. And that part of it is great. It's nothing better than having a lovely conversation with residents, but it's not. It's feisty, it's difficult, and it's a huge amount of responsibility, because we're responsible for people's council tax. So that worries me about this trend.
I think that the running of an organisation, the management of it, particularly a local authority, is extremely complex. It's not easy at all. It's very, very difficult for voters and ordinary members of the public to understand. And it's very difficult for those who are elected to understand. It's very complex setup, and people tend to oversimplify it. And one of the reasons I've never stood for council is because I don't believe I fully understand it. I also hate the conflict as well, but that's another story. But it's a very difficult job being a councillor, very difficult.
I think there's going to be an independent gain. I think that if the Labour Party has a worse night than even I'm anticipating, then independents may well be the largest body in Peterborough City Council after the May elections. I think that independent councillors can be fantastic. They can also not be fantastic, just like any other councillor in the party. Quite frankly, it is down to the individual of how good they're going to be and effective they're going to be. I think it can be tough being an independent. Even within Peterborough First, I had a sounding board. I was having all those phone calls, right? So every so often I got to slip in what I was feeling. But you don't do that as an independent, underlying independent. So you do miss a bit of that. But I would like to say the same for Julie here as well. You can still be very effective, do change. I've done motions, I've done lots of questions, I've done all sorts, being an independent councillor. It doesn't restrict you from doing anything, but it's hard work.
One of the keys to being independent, I suppose, as well, is actually having the guts to actually listen to other people and to take advice from other people that you might not necessarily agree with. So you are learning the job and learning the role, as opposed to being so independent that you listen to nobody.
It is really hard as well not having a team. The situation I was in when I became an independent was a very sad and difficult one, and I lost my entire team in one fell swoop. But coming in with no team, I mean, getting elected is really hard. It's exhausting, and you come straight off the back of that into actually having to do the work really, really quickly, and no one to talk to. So what I would advise independents to do is make friends in the council. It don't matter if they're politically aligned with you, but make friends. And there are lovely people there. There's 60 of us at present. Let's remember that. And then at least you've got someone to talk to. This may surprise your listeners. More of my time is spent on the phone talking to other councillors who are distressed and they need someone to talk to. And perhaps because I'm independent, I'm a bit older and experienced, we can have those conversations. So it's a lot of those conversations with residents as well. But there's a huge need for emotional support within the council because it is difficult. So that's my advice. If you are elected independent, make friends with other councillors who've got experience, at least so that you can run ideas past them and kind of figure things out, not just on your own.
I would say this, especially if any independent, but any candidate at all, go to a full council meeting. Of course, that shows you a bit, but go to a scrutiny committee meeting. Go to as many of those as possible, because that's actually where you learn the role and what it's all about. And you'll see a lot more collaboration than you ever will at a full council meeting, at a scrutiny meeting. All of a sudden you go, I thought those two don't even speak to each other or never see eye to eye. They're asking the same sort of scrutinising questions because they want the best for the city. Full council can sometimes be a little bit peacocky. That's not the case across all the meetings.
Over the past 4 or 5 years, me and David Turnock, the leader of the Civic Society, we've had meetings with Conservative, Peterborough First and Labour, walks around the city, and all of those leaders have virtually said the same thing about what they want for the city. It's just a matter of how it's done.
So as we sort of start to bring this to conclusion, I just want to take a look firstly at both of your wards and what we can potentially expect, and then if potentially another ward as well. Councillor Stevenson, obviously your ward, Orton Waterville, as you said, previously a Conservative stronghold, and then after you won in 2018, then became kind of the heart of the Greens on the council. Councillor Knight won there last year as an independent. Where do you see things heading this time?
Well, I should caveat my response by starting by saying I fully support the Green candidate. So let's make that absolutely clear. I'm not partial. I'm partial in this. And this is the Green seat. I won that particular seat as a Green. Very sad what then happened, but it's a Green seat, and I think it's right that the Greens should retain it, and I hope that will be what happens. I would honestly say it's my feeling from being the councillor there and living there. It's a 2-horse race between Reform and the Greens, and I think the Greens are absolutely realistic about that. That the Reform candidate doesn't necessarily need to do anything to be a threat. Yes, there is an independent as well. There hasn't been as much in terms of leaflets, I'll just say. There hasn't been as much. Though perhaps not knowing I was going to retire, probably, had that been known sooner, that might have had an influence. The other parties, there's nothing. So there's nothing from Labour and nothing from Conservative or Liberal Democrat, and there hasn't been for many years. But sometimes that's to do with deals behind the scenes. You might, if a certain councillor would want to keep them in, others might say, well, you don't work, you don't try as hard to win here and we won't try as hard to win there. And that is normal, by the way. And that's it come as no surprise to anybody who's a councillor here. So I'm hopeful for a Green win, as it would be, but no one should be complacent about Reform because of the national picture.
Councillor Ormston, obviously you won last time out in Thorney and Newborough. The first time that the Conservatives had lost there since the new boundaries in 2016. Where do you think your votes came? I know you said previously that the vote share went up. I think there was about an extra 350 votes than the time before. Where do you think that's going to go? Obviously, I think it was just under 900 votes. I think you got. Where do you see potentially those votes going this time? Obviously, there isn't an independent, but there is a Reform candidate. Where do you see what does your spreadsheet tell you for your ward?
Listen, there's a lot of arrogancy go into that calculation in there. But I think ultimately, I do actually think the vote share will go down. I think you'll see a dip. I think the mark bounces over. So I think it will go down, and I think it'll go blue. There's no doubt in my mind at all. It'll be blue. What shade of blue? It might be 9 or less votes in it. I think it's going to be a very close ward, that one, but it'll definitely be blue either way.
Looking across the city as a whole, is there a particular ward where you think we might see a shock result at all?
Well, it's hard to predict if it's a shock, isn't it? There are a few that are going to be huge battlegrounds, for example. I think, Dogsthorpe, for example, with things that have, happened there that have led to this situation, the incumbent not really standing. I think anywhere the incumbents actually are standing down, which is, I think, eight of the wards where the incumbents are stepping down. I think that's where you'll see the dramas, because that's where there's opportunity, because it tends to be incumbents that retain seats. So those are going to be the ones to watch, and it's more than half of them, isn't it? So it's going to be a lot of surprises. The votes will be split. Reform may not make all the gains that they think they're going to make, but they will certainly split the vote, and you might get some parties through that we thought had no chance. But when you get a big presence like Reform, who knows what's going to happen.
I mean, one ward I thought was worth mentioning was Hampton Vale. Obviously, last time out went to Peterborough first with Councillor Antunes. We have a Lib Dem there in Chris Wiggin, who seems, in terms of a comparison to other Lib Dems that have stood there, far outperforms the party. Obviously, we have a Conservative Councillor Sereste standing again. It's one of those wards, and I think the Lib Dem candidate this time out is Chris Wiggin's father, who has previously been a ward councillor, not there, but previously on the council. Do we think? I mean, it's one of those that actually I can't predict where that's likely to go, because I think Peterborough's got about 400 votes last time out. It's also one of the lowest turnout wards historically. I think lowered sort of 22%. So it's one of those that trying to predict where that's going to go is.
It's a maturing ward. I mean, some of my ward of Orton Waterville, we have new build. It's got hundreds of people in new build area, and they tend not to vote because they're not emotionally settled. They're thinking, well, I live here, then I'll live somewhere else, so why bother? So as Hampton matures, it's going to shift, because people will start caring more about where they live, and then they'll realise they can influence it, or some of them will. And so hopefully that vote share will go up. But yeah, some of those councillors have got in on incredibly low, just eye-wateringly low number of votes in the past. So I hope that will change. It feels like it's going to be a battle in those wards.
I mean, I have that down as one of my close wards. The seat that Councillor Farouk has vacated, I've got that as a close ward. Dogthorpe as a close ward. I think there's 5. I've got 5 where, and those 5 actually matter. You know, all of these really matter about what the council looks like after May. I have my, like I say, I haven't sat on the fence for any. I've had to put a plus or a minus next to each one. But at the end of the day, I do think there's going to be some very close results, as there were last time round. As I said, I only won by 9, and I didn't even make the top 3 or 5 outcomes that night, the closest outcome. So it's going to be close.
I mean, Passing and Walton might also be another interesting one. Obviously, last time out, as you said, Councillor Nick Sanford lost his seat there. I think Councillor Rafiq did a good job in building up, having also stood the year before. Reform seemed to have quite a good candidate, or quite an active candidate there. So, I mean, that's going to be an interesting one, obviously, with an incumbent Lib Dem again.
I mean, I must admit, I think that one's going Conservative. I think they've campaigned very well. Either that was just my algorithm that keeps putting up. I don't think it's just my algorithm. I think some people are just very strong with their campaigning. So I'll be surprised. That would be a shock for me if that didn't go Conservative. That'd be a shock for me.
I mean, Paston and Walton, Central, Ravensthorpe, these are battlegrounds, because the rise of the Greens. Before, when it was Conservative versus Labour, it was kind of quite clear cut, but the Greens have come and ploughed right through it. And those, going by the online political chit chat, bloody, very bloody, that battling, which is good. That's good for residents. You want a proper fight, and I got frustrated during my last election, where my opponents seemed to have given up, whereas I want. It sounds counterintuitive, but I want to be pushed as hard as possible, because it raises my game. I get bored very easily. I want to work. I want to earn that seat. And I think most of us are quite competitive, or we wouldn't go into this. So those are going to be very interesting wards to watch.
So just to bring things to a conclusion, I wonder if I can push you for some predictions. Firstly, Councillor Ormston, you've already answered this, but who do we think is going to be winning the most seats on the night? We've got 18 up, probably 6 or 7 is going to be enough to win the night.
Oh, I've got it. It's less than that. Like I said, I think they're going to win 5, and I think that still makes them the Reform the biggest winners of that election.
I think I agree with that. I think Reform are going to be the biggest winners, because that's what people are looking for. I think that's what the press are looking for. I think that's what the media are looking for. They've got their headline written already.
I feel it's too close to call, but we have to look at what happened in the Fletton and Woodstone by-election, where Reform took it. So, but knowing that everyone's fighting so hard, so it will come down to turnout. It's in the hands of the voters, as it should be.
So, second prediction, do you think there will be a different party considered the winner on the night? Not necessarily in terms of number of seats, but actually we look and say, well, actually the Greens have had a really good night, so actually they could be considered the winners.
The Conservatives will say they won no matter what.
But I mean, we could still get a situation where the Conservatives
got with the popular votes.
Still win the popular vote.
Yes, that's right. I mean, it's, but we're all relentlessly optimistic because we have to be. But I think the Greens, when you look at the journey we've been on in 10 years, I think the Greens are winning by setting realistic goals. And then achieving them, and then some. So I wouldn't underestimate them at all. I do think this is their time.
I think that they're all going to have their own individual wins, to be honest. There's the only one I'm a little bit unsure about is Lib Dems. I can't envisage what huge success looks for them on that night, or other than what a really bad loss will look for them. And like I said, that's only losing probably two seats. So I do fear for them a little bit from a success point of view. But maybe that's just because I'm doing it a disservice. So I apologise to Lib Dems and Lib Dems voters. But I do think that Labour may well turn around and go, we did only lose 2, we did only lose 3. We see that as a success. I think the Conservatives have a great chance of actually having the highest vote share on the night as well. I think there'll be narratives for everyone to pick up.
I think the Greens will do well from that perspective, because people perceive the Green Party as being closer to local roots than most of the other parties. They perceive that, rightly or wrongly, that's what they think.
So just very finally, do you have any final thoughts for voters, candidates, successful councillors after May 7th election?
Well, I wrote down a few things, because I bang on about this quite a bit. I think the successful council for Peterborough over the next few years will be that can manage change. There's going to be an awful lot of change. And in fact, Peterborough's been very good at managing change over the years through the Development Corporation, through the expansion of Peterborough. We're in now for a massive change in terms of the local authority, and that's how we manage it. And we've got to tie in with that. How do we promote positivity? How can we keep it positive? How can we make sure that Peterborough is seen to be driving forward? And allied to that, I think I've written down here, never underestimate the importance of attracting and retaining first-rate officers. Because it's not just the councillors we're talking about here, it's people who are paid to deliver these successes, and that's really important. And the final thing is, I keep coming back to it, it's my favourite phrase, the glint in the eye. We need people at all levels who've got the glint in the eye.
I think for me I think you have to have a look at the wider context now. As I say, we're going to go through a transition period. And I'm so pleased Toby said what he said. I had a wry smile as he was saying it, because the decisions you're making in regards to local government reorganisation impacts staff. It impacts council officers, not just in our authority, potentially neighbouring authorities as well. Don't just think about ourselves as councillors and the councillor role and that governance structure. We'll be making decisions, and decisions will be being made that impact people's livelihoods. I can't stress that enough. This isn't about shouting about a bridge or shouting about a hotel where largely the decisions have been made and the direction of travels are fairly set. You're actually going to start having discussions around people's livelihoods. So let's be serious, and let's make sure we're going into a really bright future for Peterborough and what that new authority looks like.
Empower and get behind people who are good at this but aren't necessarily good at dealing with really strong personalities. Just get behind them. Show leadership within your parties or between each other. If you're independents, get some good mentoring type people around you, so that we can make the good ideas that so many people at the council have and the public have, we can actually make them happen without the usual suspects getting in the way, frightening people, making people feel they can't speak up because they're scared to. We need to overcome that, or Peterborough won't thrive, and that's tragic. We do have the skills here. I mean, I've stood up in the council chamber and said, we have skills, I have skills, and I'm not able to use them. My greatest disappointment as a councillor is that I'm a, if I may say, skilled public speaker. I've written a book on public speaking. I'm a skilled public speaker. I've never been able to use those skills at the council for the benefit of my residents. Oh, it's been really, really hard to do that. Even in a leadership position, it's been really hard. And you can repeat that with every councillor in there who've got latent skills, that because of the structure of it, where you're shouted down or you don't feel that you'll be backed if you say something, things don't get said and then things don't happen. That's a huge change, a huge challenge. And to some political parties, I would say, take a look at your current leadership. And if it's not delivering for the city, then change it, because something does need to change, because Peterborough deserves better.
Councillor Stevenson, Councillor Ormston, Toby Wood, thank you once again for joining me on the politics of Peterborough.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And that's it for this episode. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks to Cllr Julie Stevenson, Cllr Mark Ormston, and Toby Wood for joining me. They're all regular posters on X. Councillor Stevenson can be found at Cllr Julie S, Councillor Ormston at MORM_Peterborough, and Toby at Toby Woody. You can find the podcast on X and Facebook at PoliticsPBORO. Please let me know what you thought of the episode. Make sure you subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts, so that you get each episode as soon as it's released. If you have any suggestions as to who you'd like to hear on the show, or any questions you'd like me to put to my guests, you can email politics.peterborough@hotmail.com. This episode of The Politics of Peterborough was created, hosted, recorded, and edited by me. I'll see you next time.